was only 2 months afterwards Harry lost his life. Why? He had failed to heed the warnings. The warnings were provided by the mountain in this case, but Harry says, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Let's go back to a Bible account. Back in Genesis, the days of Noah. Now, in the record that we have in Genesis, it tells us that the badness at that time was so bad that Jehovah God decided he was going to destroy the wicked by means of a global flood. But here again, you notice Jehovah gave instructions for the righteous so they could be saved. He told Noah how to build this huge ark, what to build it out of, how many floors and how long, how high, and all this type of thing. Now, you figure that if Noah was not a faithful individual, he would have just said to Jehovah, you got to be kidding me, I'm not doing that. But that ark was Noah's means of survival and his immediate family. And so Genesis 6:22 tells us that Noah did just so. But think about all the other people then. All the time Noah was building this thing, some 40, 50 years, he's out knocking on doors. He's telling everybody about this flood that's going to come. Jehovah God said this is coming. And they all ignored him. But what happened when it started to rain? And next thing you know, the water's up to their ankles and heading for their knees. You hear them up there pounding on that door of the ark? Let us in, we believe now. But what's the Bible say? Jehovah closed the door and sealed it. Nobody else could get in. It was too late. But Noah survived because he heeded the warnings, and the others did not. Now, what's interesting, we're going to go to Matthew chapter 24 here, but what's interesting, when this took place, what was Jesus doing? He was in heaven, and he's observing all the situation that's going on here at the earth, and he realized the situation that was going on would have something to do with our day. So let's go to Matthew chapter 24, and we'll see what he had to say about this. In Matthew chapter 24, we're going to start in verse 37. He says, "For just as the days of Noah were, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. For as they were in those days before the flood, eating and drinking, men marrying, and women being given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and they took no note until the flood came and swept them all away. So the presence of the Son of Man will be." Okay? So this is rather interesting because he noted this, and so he's saying to us that during the presence of Jesus, this is the way the human family is going to be. They're not going to pay attention to the warnings. And so we have another account in the Bible. This one goes back to Genesis as well, but this is about Lot. Now, you remember the account about Lot? He was a righteous individual, but he lived in the city of Sodom. And Sodom was really a bad city when it came to their morals and so forth. And so let's go to Genesis chapter 19. And here in this particular account, Jehovah again provided a warning to Lot that he had to take action if he wanted to save his life. Because, as Jehovah put it, he was going to destroy the city, but he was going to do it by means of sulfur and fire from heaven. So here in chapter 19, look in verse 14. Lot's daughters were engaged to two of the gentlemen in this city. And it says, "Hence Lot went on out and began to speak to his sons-in-law who were to take his daughters. And he kept on saying, 'Get up and get out of this place, because Jehovah is bringing the city to ruin.' But in the eyes of his sons-in-law, he seemed like a man who was joking." Get the picture? They took it as a joke. So as we read the account through, Lot and his daughters survived. The rest lost their lives. And they lost their lives for a specific reason, because they failed to heed the warnings. So again, we have a warning for our day, and this time it's found in the book of Luke, chapter 17. And keep your Bibles open here in Luke, but we're going to go to another chapter here in a few minutes. Luke chapter 17, and starting in verse 26, it's repeating what we read in Matthew. So we don't need to read that, but that's a repeat what was in Matthew. And then he goes on starting in verse 28. "Likewise, the days of Lot, they were eating and they were drinking. They were buying and they were selling. They were planting and they were building. But on the day that Lot came out of Sodom, it rained fire and sulfur from heaven and destroyed them all. You notice the warning? The same way it will be on that day when the Son of Man is to be revealed. Now, what's interesting with these two accounts is they mention things that we do every single day. Eating, drinking, marrying, buying, selling, and so forth. That's a normal process of living. Most of us here probably had breakfast before we came here this morning. That's not a crime. That's not what Jesus was saying they were ignoring. They were ignoring the warnings. That's what they weren't heeding. The warnings were that they had to abide by Jehovah's righteous standards if they wanted to survive. So, when we take it down to our day, when we consider these two verses, we really need to recognize that what Jesus is saying, it was during the time of his presence that man would do the same thing. So, when is the time of Jesus' presence? Well, we all know that started in 1914 when he was enthroned as king. That also tells us something else. That great day of Jehovah is very, very near at this time. And so, we also recognize that Jehovah God helps us enormously so that we can survive, so that we can escape this world's destiny. In the book of Luke now, if we go to chapter 21, he gives us some instructions, some guidance to follow so that we don't get entrapped and sidetracked so that we lose out on life. Here in Luke chapter 21, starting in verse 10, he gives a composite sign that will take place during his presence. And he says, when you see these things happening, know that he is now acting as king. It says, then he went on to say to them, and now he's talking to his disciples, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes in one place after another, pestilences and food shortages, and there will be fearful sights and from heaven great signs. Now, for this to be a composite sign meant that these things all had to take place during the same time period to have any major effect on us. And so, let's talk about some of those. How about things like wars? Well, you know, critics will say that, oh, come on, there's always been wars. Well, this is true. This is true. You look back in all the history books, even in the Bible, it talks about wars. But what happened in 1914? We had World War I, shortly followed by World War II. 59 nations, not local now, 59 around the whole globe, all involved in war. And what did Jesus say? Nation will rise against nation, not city against city or town against town. 64 million people killed during that particular time period, according to the records. Never before has war been fought on a scale like that. So there's one of the signs. How about earthquakes? This one I find rather interesting because when we do homework for these talks, we find a lot of information we didn't know existed. For 1,122 years, man has kept a record of earthquakes, where they were and how many people lost their lives. For that 1,122 years, up to 1914 now, 1,800 people per year lost their lives as a result of earthquakes. Okay? So let's go from 1914 only to 1983. We're not going past there. We have earthquakes recently that snuffed out hundreds of thousands all at one time. From 1914 to 1983, 25,000 people a year lost their lives. You realize that's a 1,400% increase? That's just earthquakes now. If we calculated everything from 83 to today, you can see how that number is enormously going to jump up. How about pestilences? 1918 to 1919 had the Spanish flu. We're all familiar with it. 20 million people lost their lives. Today, we deal with things like malaria, river fever, tuberculosis, sexually transmitted diseases. There's not even accurate records on many of these, how many people have lost their lives. But there's one that you have seldom hear talked about when it comes to pestilences. That's cancer. How many people do you know lost their lives or have cancer? You see, it's enormous. It touches almost everybody. And that's what's going going on today. And then we have food shortages. Now, we talked a little bit about the potential for some severe incidents that could take place if the floods and so forth continue like they're going. But following World War I and World War II, we had a quarter of the world's population starving to death. And there's a reason for this. Because when there is war, all the materials, the supplies, the efforts, the energies, everything goes to the war effort. Now, if you knew some old-time farmers, if you talked to them, they had troubles getting enough fuel to even do a partial operation, say nothing more of a full operation of their farm. So they pretty much were put out of business because all the fuel went to war activity. But there's another part of the composite sign we have not talked about yet, and that's found in the book of Matthew. So let's go over there. Matthew chapter 24 again. And this is part of that composite sign, and this is something that did not take place before 1914 as it is today. Matthew chapter 24, and look at verse 14. And this good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come, or we could say, and then that great day of Jehovah will arrive. Now, think about this. Nearly 7 million today are out knocking on doors, sharing the truths found in the Bible with their neighbors, those in our territories, are we not? This goes on not just here in Troy, not just in Duanesburg, where I come from. Every country around the world. I don't care where you go, Jehovah's Witnesses will knock on your door. See, several years ago, I was out in service with a brother, and people were just moving in. I said, well, we'll introduce ourselves and just let them know that we're here. And as soon as we started walking up, the guys go, give me a break. He said, I just moved from Jersey to get away from you people. You're up here too? Well, no matter where you go, you see, he could have moved someplace in Africa, whatever. And Jehovah's Witnesses would knock on his door. That's part of that composite sign, you see. That's going on today. But we also have some other counsel that's found in the Bible, because in order for us to survive this great day of Jehovah, we have to abide by the guidance that Jehovah provides, do we not? That's all found here in the Bible. So let's go back to Luke chapter 31, or chapter 21, rather. Luke chapter 21, and we find some counsel here that we need to pay attention to, because this affects each and every one of us. Luke chapter 21, starting in verse 34, it says, but pay attention to yourselves, that your hearts never become weighed down with overeating and heavy drinking and anxieties of life. And suddenly that day be instantly upon you as a snare, for it will come in upon all those dwelling upon the face of the earth. People wait then, all the time making supplication, that you may succeed in escaping all these things that are destined to occur, and in standing before the Son of Man. Now, this is rather important information, so let's just talk about this for a little bit. In verse 34, it says, but pay attention. Why do we need to pay attention? Because we need to know what Jehovah God is instructing us. And see, we get that every single week, do we not? And we need to pay attention to it and heed that information. And then it also says not to become weighed down with the anxieties of life. Anybody here not have any anxieties? Nothing to worry about? You got up this morning and, well, it's a beautiful day. Not a worry in the world. Well, we know that's not true, is it? What Jehovah God realizes is that we all are going to have anxieties. And so we kind of set them aside. We come to the meetings and we go out in service and so forth. But you know what happens when you go home? Yeah, they're still there. So what happens if we allow those anxieties to control us? They'll run our life for us. They'll run us right off course. And that's what Satan wants. Get you going off the tracks in some place where you didn't want to go, didn't realize you're going. And then it says to keep awake spiritually, making supplication. Well, what is supplication? That's an earnest form of prayer. You see, the Bible makes it clear it's perfectly fine to pray to Jehovah God for help, for guidance, and for strength, because he knows we're going to need it at this particular time. And one way we gain this is by what we're doing today. We attend Christian meetings. In fact, in Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, it tells us that it's by means of the Christian meetings that we learn Jehovah's ways. And isn't that, in fact, what we do every single week? We delve into the Bible page by page, verse by verse, trying to get a full understanding of what Jehovah expects of us. So eagerly studying the Bible, Bible-based publications, is an absolute must if we're going to survive this world's destiny. This is how we learn God's ways. And what's really interesting is that as we do this and we grow spiritually, it's like all of a sudden we realize one day that, you know what, all those laws and the principles that are in the Bible, well, they're not burdensome. They actually make my life, the quality of my life better. I have a better life as a result. They bring blessings to me. And so we learn to enjoy what Jehovah is telling us, and we take it in, you see. But then we have other responsibilities that we have to do, and one is to dedicate our lives to do Jehovah's will. That's followed by water baptism. And, oh yeah, we go out and we knock on doors. Those truths that we have are life-saving, and we share them with other people. And this is one of the things that we're going to be doing. But one of the scriptures I find in the Bible that I find very encouraging, because all these things we talked about, it's like, not so good, is it? The world's coming to an end in a sense. God is going to bring destruction upon the wicked. But let's look at Isaiah chapter 45. Isaiah chapter 45, and this will give us a little bit of insight about what to expect for the future. We're going to look at verse 18. In Isaiah 45, verse 18, it says, "For this is what Jehovah has said, the creator of the heavens, he, the true God, the former of the earth and the maker of it, he, the one who firmly established it." Now note this, "who did not create it simply for nothing." Now he's talking about the earth. He's saying, I didn't create the earth for nothing. So what did he create it for? "Who formed it even to be inhabited." Now, we have learned this consistently, and we've talked about it this morning. It was to be inhabited by righteous individuals. Remember the one in Psalms we looked up, that the wicked would be destroyed, but the righteous would be remaining. This is the hope we have for the future. If we abide by Jehovah's righteous standards, we can be part of those righteous individuals who will have the right to inhabit the earth. But to do that, we need to heed scriptural warnings, do we not? Now, this morning we talked about Noah and his family, Lot and his family, and you remember Harvey. Well, hopefully we recognize by now that in every single case they had two things in common. You remember what they were? Well, first of all, in every single case they were given a warning. And we're being given a warning today, are we not? But what happened in Noah's day? Think about this. They were given a warning. And even for Noah, he never seen a flood before, but he heeded the warning. But those people in that time, they had never, ever seen a flood before. And they more or less scoffed at Noah and laughed at him. But it cost them their life, didn't it? Then we take Lot's sons-in-law. They laughed. Oh, come on. I've never seen fire and sulfur come out of heaven to devour a city. But it did. And it cost them their lives. And Harry, well, even after the mountain gave him a warning, spewed out some ash and steam, says, I'm huffing and puffing, I'm going to do something. And Harry says, nah, I'll be fine. And he lost his life. He failed to heed the warning. So what we want to take away from this presentation this morning is the fact that you and I have never, ever seen the great day of Jehovah. So are we going to heed the warning? Now, you remember the song we sang in the beginning? Flee to God's kingdom? Well, that's what we really need to do. And if we flee to God's kingdom, this is what we're doing here this morning now, and if we seriously seriously heed the warnings, follow the counsel that we're being given, each and every one of us can escape this world's destiny.